White bank employee looks down on a black engineer. The smile disappears when he returns in a police uniform. People always talk about judging a book by its cover, but nobody tells you how raw it feels when you are the book, and the cover is the only thing people see. It was supposed to be a quick lunch break. Aaron deposit a check, grab a coffee, maybe call mom on the way back to the office. But the moment Marcus stepped into the Sterling National Bank that Thursday afternoon, he could feel it. The air changed. Not literally, but in the way stares stick to you when you're not the right kind of customer. He was used to it. The tight-lipped smiles. The way some people looked at him, then at the door, as if checking whether security might need to escort him back outside. But today was going to be different, though Marcus didn't know it yet. The lobby was a glass and marble display of wealth. A fountain trickled quietly near the entrance. Warm jazz played overhead, the kind of soundtrack meant to say we're sophisticated, you're safe here. Safe, unless you didn't look like you belonged. Behind the counter sat a woman in her late 30s, pale skin, hair pulled into a perfect blonde bun, makeup precise enough to pass an inspection drill. Her nameplate read Rebecca Hall, Senior Loan Officer. She didn't smile when Marcus approached. Yes? She asked, her voice clipped. Marcus placed his check, a sizable one, on the counter along with his ID. I'd like to deposit this into my account. Her eyes flicked to the check, then to him, then back to the check. Do you have an account here? Yes, Marcus said evenly. Been a customer for 7 years. She didn't move to type anything. Instead, she studied him the way someone might examine a piece of fruit they weren't sure was ripe enough to buy. And what is it you do for a living? Marcus tilted his head. I'm a software engineer. A small, almost imperceptible smirk tugged at her lips. Right. That right hit like a slap. He'd heard it before, not the word itself, but the tone, the insinuation. Sure you are. Rebecca picked up the check again. It's quite a large amount. We'll need to verify the source before we can process it. Marcus kept his composure. It's from my company. I just finished a major project. You can call the payroll department if you need. She didn't reach for the phone. Instead, she leaned back in her chair, her voice sweetened with the kind of politeness that's anything but polite. Why don't you take a seat? This might take a while. Marcus glanced at the clock. He didn't have time for a while. I can wait here. Rebecca's eyes narrowed, as if his refusal to be shuffled aside was some kind of challenge. Security, she said, without raising her voice. It was a single word, but it dropped into the room like a hammer. Heads turned. A tall guard appeared at the edge of the counter, his expression unreadable. Marcus breathed in slowly. He wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing him lose his cool. You know what? He said, pocketing his check and ID. I'll handle this another way. Rebecca gave him a tight smile, the kind that says exactly what I thought. That evening, Marcus sat in his apartment, the city lights spilling through his window. His police badge lay on the table beside him, gleaming under the warm lamp. He'd left the force 2 years ago to focus on tech work, but technically, he was still in the reserve unit. He didn't use the uniform unless he had to. Tonight, he decided he had to. The next morning, the bank lobby was just as polished, just as quiet. But when Marcus walked in wearing the deep blue uniform of the Metro Police Department, it wasn't quiet in quite the same way. Conversations stuttered. People glanced, then looked again. Rebecca was at her desk, tapping something into her computer. She looked up, and for a split second, her smile started to form, the automatic, customer service kind. But it froze before it could land. Marcus stepped forward. Morning, Ms. Hall, he said, voice calm but carrying enough weight to draw attention from 2 desks over. Her eyes flicked to his badge, then his name tag, then back to his face. That tight smirk from yesterday? Gone. I came back to finish our transaction, Marcus said, placing the check and his ID on her desk. I think you'll find everything in order. Rebecca swallowed hard, her hands suddenly precise and mechanical on the keyboard. Of course, Officer Williams, the first. I apologize for the delay yesterday. It was policy. Policy, Marcus repeated softly. Funny how it works differently for different people. Her cheeks flushed, but she kept typing. Around them, the quiet jazz felt suddenly too loud. The printer hummed as Rebecca processed the deposit slip. Marcus stood there, motionless, his presence heavier than the pressed fabric of his uniform. Every keystroke she made seemed louder than it should have been. I've expedited the verification, she said finally, sliding the receipt toward him. Marcus took it without looking at it. Thank you. he said, the words flat, neutral. But his eyes stayed locked on hers for a moment longer than polite conversation allowed. Long enough for the message to settle in. I remember yesterday. She tried to look away, but something kept her gaze tethered. It wasn't the badge. It was the fact that this man she'd dismissed, written off, now stood in front of her with undeniable authority. And he wasn't angry. Somehow that was worse. Marcus didn't leave right away. He stepped aside to speak with the bank manager, a middle-aged man in a tailored gray suit whose nameplate read Michael Vargas. The conversation started casually, but Rebecca noticed Michael's eyebrows rise slightly when Marcus showed him something on his phone. She couldn't hear the words, but she saw the manager's glance flick briefly in her direction. Her stomach tightened. Outside, the city was alive with the weekday rush. Marcus walked slowly down the marble steps, his mind replaying the encounter in a loop. He could have ended it there, a small personal victory, a reminder that appearances can be deceiving. But something in him itched. This wasn't about one rude bank employee. It was about the 100 small, invisible cuts people like him took every year. The job offers questioned. The apartments suddenly already rented. The random security checks in places where nobody else got stopped. The unspoken assumption, you don't belong here. He thought of his niece, Kayla, 10 years old, smart as a whip, already talking about wanting to be an architect. What would she face in a world that still saw her first as black, second as everything else? Marcus didn't go back to the engineering office that afternoon. Instead, he drove to the precinct where he still volunteered twice a month. Inside, the air smelled faintly of coffee and printer toner. A few officers nodded as he walked past. Williams called Captain Harris from his glass-walled office. You here for the neighborhood patrol? Not today, Marcus said, stepping inside. I need a favor. That favor turned into a formal meeting request with Sterling National Bank, not as a customer, but as part of the department's community relations and anti-bias initiative. Marcus had worked with Harris on it before, visiting schools and businesses to address racial profiling and implicit bias. Now, he wanted Sterling National on that list. Harris leaned back in his chair. You think they'll go for it? They'll go for it, Marcus said, once they realize what the alternative looks like. 3 days later, Rebecca sat in the bank's conference room alongside Michael Vargas and 2 other managers. A polished catering tray of pastries sat untouched in the middle of the table. The door opened, and Marcus stepped in, this time not in full uniform, but in a crisp shirt, the badge clipped discreetly to his belt. He carried a slim folder. Good morning, he said evenly, taking a seat across from them. Michael did the introductions, but Marcus didn't look away from Rebecca when he began. Last week, I walked into this branch to deposit a check. I was met with skepticism, delay, and the summoning of security before any legitimate verification was attempted. I've been a customer for years. I was polite. I provided ID. None of that mattered. Rebecca shifted in her seat. The room felt smaller. This, Marcus continued, opening the folder to reveal printed policies from the bank's own website, is your stated customer service standard. Nowhere does it say that certain amounts trigger a wait over there while we figure out if you're lying clause. What happened wasn't policy. It was bias. Michael cleared his throat. We take such allegations very seriously. I'm not here for an apology, Marcus said sharply. I'm here to make sure it doesn't happen to someone else. I work with a program that partners with local businesses to provide bias training and community engagement. I'd like to see Sterling National participate. The silence that followed was thick. Rebecca wanted to speak, to explain, to defend herself, but every sentence she rehearsed in her head sounded like an excuse. Finally, Michael nodded. I think that's worth discussing. Over the next hour, they went over the program details, workshops, role-playing scenarios, data on customer retention after anti-bias training. Marcus kept his tone professional, but every so often, his gaze would flick toward Rebecca, and she could feel the weight of his earlier words pressing in. When the meeting ended, Marcus gathered his papers. Rebecca stayed seated until everyone else left, then stood and walked to the door where he was waiting. She began, but the words stuck. Yes, Marcus prompted, not unkindly. I was wrong, she said finally, her voice low. And I'm sorry. I don't know if that matters. Marcus studied her. It matters if it changes what you do next. And then he was gone, the click of the door closing behind him echoing in her ears. That evening, Rebecca sat alone at her kitchen table, the events of the past few days running through her mind. She thought about the way she'd felt that first day when Marcus walked in, the instant, unconscious assessment, the assumptions she hadn't even realized she was making. She thought about her own childhood, growing up in a neighborhood where everyone looked like her, where difference was something she only saw on TV. The uncomfortable truth settled in her chest. She hadn't been malicious. She'd been lazy. Too lazy to question the reflexes that had shaped her reaction. 2 weeks later, Sterling National announced its participation in the community program. Training sessions began. The first was awkward staff shuffling in their seats, a few eye rolls, but by the second session, something had shifted. People started talking, admitting things, seeing the invisible lines they'd never noticed before. Marcus attended the final workshop, standing in the back as employees discussed real scenarios from their own experience. He didn't speak much. He didn't have to. When the session ended, Rebecca approached him again. "I wanted you to know," she said quietly. "I've been thinking about what you said. About policy and bias. I'm catching myself more now. Stopping to think before I act. It's humbling." Marcus gave a small nod. That's how change starts. For the first time, her smile was genuine, and this time, it stayed. Marcus didn't linger in the conversation that day. He gave Rebecca a nod, the kind that says "I hear you," but doesn't promise instant forgiveness. He'd learned that real change didn't happen in a single apology or a handful of training sessions. As he stepped out of the bank into the late afternoon sun, he thought of his father, who had always said, "Son, racism isn't just in the shouts and the fists. It's in the pause before someone hands you trust." Marcus had been on both ends of that pause, once as a boy watching his father get questioned in a grocery store for no reason, and now as a man who had forced an institution to look at itself. The next month, the program's partnership with Sterling National was covered in the local paper. The article was straightforward, no sensationalism, just the facts. The bank was implementing anti-bias measures in customer service. But buried halfway down was a paragraph that named Marcus Williams as one of the people who had initiated the change. He hadn't expected anyone to notice, but his phone started buzzing. Old friends, former colleagues, even his niece, Kayla, called. "Uncle Marcus," she said, her voice bubbling with excitement. "My teacher showed us the article in class. Everyone was talking about how cool it is that you're a police officer and an engineer." Marcus smiled. "Guess that means I'm officially the most interesting uncle in the family." Kayla laughed, then got serious. "Uncle Marcus, do you think it'll be different for me when I'm older? Like people won't look at me weird?" His smile softened. "I think it'll be better if people like us keep pushing. Every time you make someone see you for who you are, you're making it better for the next person." Meanwhile, inside Sterling National, Rebecca found herself looking at customers differently, not with suspicion or distrust, but with curiosity. She began to notice her own micro-reactions, the way her shoulders tensed when someone unfamiliar approached, the assumptions she made from a surname or an accent. She didn't like what she found, but she kept digging. One afternoon, an older black woman came to her desk with a stack of bills and a tired smile. Rebecca caught herself starting to ask for extra ID before realizing there was no legitimate reason to do so. She processed the transaction smoothly, even making a point to walk the woman through a better savings plan. As the customer left, she turned and said, "Thank you, dear. You've been very kind." It was such a simple thing, but Rebecca felt her chest loosen in a way it hadn't in years. The turning point came unexpectedly. A Friday morning in late spring, the bank was unusually busy. Rebecca was behind the counter when a commotion stirred near the entrance, voices raised, a tense edge to them. A young black man in a hoodie stood near the teller line, his voice tight. "I'm telling you, this is my account. That's my money." The teller, new and visibly nervous, had already called security. Rebecca felt her pulse quicken. She recognized the moment for what it was, the same script that had played out with Marcus, just with different faces. Before the guard could reach the young man, Rebecca stepped forward. "Sir," she said, loud enough to cut through the noise, "why don't you come over to my desk, and we'll get this sorted?" The young man hesitated, eyes darting between her and the guard. Slowly, he followed her. Once seated, Rebecca really listened. He explained that his paycheck had bounced because his employer made a payroll error. He had proof on his phone. Rebecca verified it, adjusted the account, and within minutes, the problem was fixed. When he left, he gave her a look she recognized, part relief, part disbelief. She'd seen Marcus give her the opposite look not long ago. Later that day, she sent Marcus an email. Subject: thought you'd want to know. Today, I caught myself before making the same mistake I made with you. I stopped. I listened. And I fixed it. You were right, it matters what I do next. She didn't expect him to reply right away, but he did. That's how you change the world, Rebecca. One decision at a time. The summer passed, and the training program expanded to other branches. Marcus kept working in both his engineering role and his police reserve unit, though more community outreach requests started coming his way. One day, he was invited to speak at a city forum on trust between law enforcement and minority communities. The panel was tense: activists, officers, business leaders, but when Marcus spoke about his experience at Sterling National, the room quieted. I'm not here to tell you the problem is solved, he said. It's not. But I've seen what happens when someone chooses to stop and think before acting on bias. That pause can be the difference between dignity and humiliation, between trust and resentment. He looked out into the audience and saw Rebecca sitting in the back row. Their eyes met for just a moment, and she gave him a small nod. In September, Marcus got a call from Michael Vargas. Officer Williams, or should I say Engineer Williams? Michael said with a chuckle. We've been reviewing the past quarter, and customer satisfaction is up. Complaints about treatment have gone down. I wanted you to know the changes stuck. That's good to hear, Marcus said. Michael hesitated. And Rebecca, she's become one of our strongest advocates for the program. She even requested to lead the new staff orientation module on bias awareness. Marcus didn't say much, but inside, he felt something loosen, not victory exactly, but a step forward. One evening that fall, Marcus was walking home from the grocery store when he heard a voice call out from across the street. Officer Williams. It was Rebecca, carrying a paper bag of takeout. She crossed the street and smiled. I was just telling my friend about you, she said. About everything. How it changed the way I see people. How it made me realize I've been blind to things my whole life. Marcus raised an eyebrow. You really tell your friends about that? Yeah, she said a little sheepishly. Because it's embarrassing, but it's also important. People need to hear that you can mess up and still do better. They stood there for a moment, the city lights flickering above them. You know, Marcus said, if more people admitted that, we might actually get somewhere. Rebecca smiled. Then I guess we'd better keep talking. By winter, the story of Sterling National's transformation had spread beyond the city. Other banks reached out to join the program. Marcus found himself invited to meetings with business leaders who had never before considered bias a bottom-line issue. In every meeting, he told the same truth. You don't fix bias with a memo. You fix it with moments. Every interaction is a chance to either confirm a stereotype or break it. And every time, he thought of that Thursday afternoon when Rebecca's smirk had told him exactly what she thought he was and how, months later, she had proven she could think differently. The smile that had once been a sign of dismissal was now something else entirely, a sign that maybe, just maybe, people could change. The year ended with the city dusted in snow. Streetlights glowed against the frost, and the air carried that quiet stillness only winter nights seemed to hold. Marcus was at his sister's house for the holidays, sitting in the living room while Kayla worked on a gingerbread house at the coffee table. She was meticulous, her little hands steady as she lined gumdrops along the roof. You're too careful, Marcus teased. The point is to eat it, not build a skyscraper out of it. Kayla laughed without looking up. That's the difference between you and me, Uncle Marcus. I'm an architect. Her confidence made him smile, but there was something in her voice that caught his attention, a kind of certainty he wished he'd had at her age. He thought about her earlier question. Do you think it'll be different for me when I'm older? He wanted to believe the answer was yes. The first week of January, Marcus was invited to speak at a statewide business conference on diversity and public trust. It was a big stage, more than 500 attendees, from CEOs to small business owners. Backstage, a volunteer handed him a program. His eyes scanned the list of speakers, and there it was, Rebecca Hall, Senior Loan Officer, Sterling National Bank Panel, turning mistakes into movement. He raised an eyebrow. This would be the first time they'd share a stage. Rebecca's panel went first. She stood at the podium in a simple navy dress, her voice steady. Last year, she began, I made a mistake. Not the kind you can fix with a refund or a new policy. I made a judgment about someone based on nothing but what I saw on the surface. I didn't think twice about it because that's the worst part of bias. It doesn't ask for your permission. It works in the background, like a bad default setting. She glanced at Marcus, just briefly. I was called out not with anger, but with proof. Proof that my assumptions were wrong. And I had a choice: defend myself or learn. I chose to learn. That choice changed me, my workplace, and, I hope, the people I interact with every day. When she stepped down, the applause was genuine. Marcus caught her eye and gave a small nod. His own talk was later that afternoon. He spoke about systems, about trust, about the pause his father had told him about the pause where bias lives. He told the story of walking into the bank as an engineer and walking back in as a police officer, and how the smile that had dismissed him the first time had disappeared the second. But this story isn't about making someone feel small in return, he said. It's about what you do after you realize you were wrong. The real victory isn't walking back in with power, it's walking out knowing the person who doubted you will never make that same mistake again. When he finished, the applause filled the hall. Afterward, they found themselves side by side at the refreshment table. Rebecca poured herself a coffee. You told it better than I do, she said quietly. You lived your part better than I did, Marcus replied. She smiled, not the tight, polished one from their first meeting, but the kind that came without effort. You know, I don't think about that day anymore the way I used to. It's not just my worst mistake. It's the day I realized I could be better. That's all anyone can ask, Marcus said. Spring came, and with it, the program's expansion to over a dozen major institutions. Marcus found himself on the road often, speaking in towns where the problem looked different but felt the same. In every place, he told the story not to shame Rebecca, but to prove that change was possible. Sometimes he wondered if people believed it. Sometimes he could see it in their eyes, that quiet disbelief that someone could be both wrong and willing to change. But more often than not, a few days after a talk, an email would land in his inbox. I caught myself today before I acted on a bad assumption. I treated someone differently because I remembered your story. It wasn't a revolution, but it was movement. One afternoon, Marcus stopped by Sterling National on an errand. The lobby was just as polished as before, but now there was a small poster by the door. We see the person, not the profile. Ask us about our bias-free commitment. Inside, Rebecca was training a new hire. He watched for a moment from across the lobby as she guided the young employee through a transaction, explaining not just the mechanics, but the why. Because you never know who's on the other side of the counter, she said, her voice warm but firm. And that's exactly why we treat everyone with the same respect. When she saw Marcus, she excused herself from the training and walked over. Dropping by unannounced, she teased. Just checking if the new sign means what it says, he replied. It does, she said. Every word. They shared a small smile, the kind built on the weight of everything unspoken. Months later, Marcus was back at his sister's house for Kayla's birthday. She was taller now, her braids longer, her ideas even bigger. Uncle Marcus, she said, tugging him toward her room. I want to show you something. She pointed to a poster board covered in sketches and notes. At the top, in bold marker, she'd written, Future Architect, Future Changemaker. I'm doing a school project about how buildings can make people feel welcome or unwelcome, she explained. Like how some spaces make you feel like you don't belong. But I'm designing one where everyone feels like they do. Marcus felt something tighten in his chest. That's a good project, he said. It's not just for school, Kayla said. It's for real life. You said every little choice matters. Well, this is my choice. That night, Marcus sat on the porch, listening to the quiet hum of the neighborhood. He thought about the long chain of moments that had led here: the smirk at the bank counter, the uniform, the meeting, the training, the quiet email from Rebecca months later. The smile that had once disappeared had been replaced by something better: respect. Not the kind you demand, but the kind you earn together. He realized then that this was the real ending, not the moment he walked back into the bank in uniform, but the moment a 10-year-old girl decided to design a world where that uniform wouldn't be necessary to be treated like you belonged. And in that thought, Marcus smiled, the kind that doesn't fade. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.